starts with something almost everyone has experienced. Music. Not screaming. Not violence. Not threats. Just music. Too loud, too late, and coming from next door. At first it's an annoyance. Then it becomes anger. Then obsession. And finally, it becomes murder. On a quiet August morning in 1993, two young men were asleep in a rented house in Mill Creek, Washington. No alarms. No arguments. No warning. Just silence, followed by the sound of a gunshot echoing through a home that would soon become a crime scene. Their killer wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a burglar looking for money. He wasn't running from the law. He was their neighbor. And what pushed him over the edge wasn't jealousy, money, or revenge. It was loud music. Tonight, we're breaking down the chilling true story of Martin Belaluchcci, a man whose rage simmered for months, whose resentment went ignored, and whose anger exploded in one of the most disturbing neighbor-on-neighbor murders in American history. Because sometimes the deadliest danger isn't across the street, it's living right next door. A quiet street with a growing problem.
Mill Creek, Washington, in the early 1990s was the kind of place people moved to for peace. Tree-lined streets, modest homes, a sense of predictability. Neighbors waved as they passed. Lawns were trimmed. Problems were small, or at least they seemed that way. In July of 1993, two young men moved into a rental property in the area. Robert McClure and Brian Beebe, both in their early 20s. They were friends, roommates, and like many young men that age, they loved music. Loud music. Music that filled rooms, spilled out windows, and vibrated walls. To them, it was freedom. Youth. A soundtrack to their lives. But to their neighbor, 43-year-old Martin Belaluchcci, it was torture. Belaluchcci was a machinist by trade. A quiet man. Older. Set in his routines. The kind of person who valued order, structure, and control. He didn't party. He didn't socialize much. And he especially didn't tolerate disruption. From the moment McClure and BBE moved in, tension began to build. At first, it was small. Complaints. Looks exchanged over fences. Conversations that ended abruptly. But as the days went on, the music continued, and Belaluchcci's patience wore thinner. He began arguing with the young men directly. According to neighbors, these weren't calm conversations. They were heated, emotional, personal. The music wasn't just noise anymore. It was an insult. Belaluchcci started bad-mouthing the young men to others on the street. He painted them as disrespectful, as troublemakers, as outsiders who didn't belong. But here's the critical detail most people miss. There were no reports of violence, no restraining orders, no police intervention that stopped what was coming. Just unresolved anger. And anger, when left to rot, doesn't disappear. It mutates.
Obsession, resentment, and a plan.
By late July, the issue was no longer just the music. It was personal. Belaluchcci felt disrespected, ignored, powerless in his own home. And for someone who relied on control to feel stable, that feeling was unbearable. Instead of walking away, instead of escalating through legal channels, he did something far more dangerous. He internalized it. Neighbors later described him as increasingly bitter, fixated. Every sound from next door became proof, in his mind, that he was being targeted. But the young men weren't thinking about him. They were living their lives. That imbalance, one side obsessing while the other remained unaware, is what makes this case so chilling. Somewhere during this time, a line was crossed in Belaluchcci's mind. This was no longer about noise. It was about punishment. On the morning of August 3, 1993, Belaluchcci made a decision that could never be undone. While the house next door was quiet, while everyone inside was asleep, he armed himself. He knew the layout. He knew the timing. He knew the people. And that knowledge made what came next even more horrifying. He broke into the home. Inside were 23-year-old Brian Beebe and his friend 23-year-old Robyn Glover, both asleep. Vulnerable. Unaware that the person standing over them had been nurturing rage for weeks. There was no argument. No confrontation. No final words. Belaluchcci shot both men in the head. Execution style. And just like that, two lives were erased. Not over hatred, not over money, but over a noise complaint that was allowed to grow into a deadly obsession.
The discovery and the manhunt.
When Robert McClure returned home later that day, nothing seemed unusual. At first, the house was quiet. Too quiet. As he moved through the rooms, the unease set in. And then he found them. Brian, Robyn, both dead. The shock was immediate, overwhelming, a moment that shattered reality and permanently altered everyone connected to that house. Police were called. The neighborhood was flooded with emergency lights. The peaceful street transformed into a crime scene. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't random. There were no signs of forced theft, no valuables missing, no unknown intruder. And almost immediately, suspicion turned next door. Martin Belaluchcci was gone. He had fled. Authorities launched a manhunt, and the case quickly gained national attention. Belaluchcci was featured on America's Most Wanted, his face broadcast across the country as police searched for answers. For 3 days, he stayed on the run. 3 days knowing what he had done. 3 days knowing the lives he had destroyed. 3 days knowing there was no escape. And then, unexpectedly, he turned himself in.
Justice, sentence, and a final warning.
In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Belaluchcci was charged with 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The prosecution painted a clear picture. This was not a crime of passion. It was planned, deliberate, cold. The defense couldn't argue insanity, couldn't deny the intent. And ultimately, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. Belaluchcci was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A permanent end to freedom for a man who couldn't tolerate noise. 2 families lost sons. A neighborhood lost its sense of safety. And a small disagreement escalated into irreversible tragedy. This case stands as one of the clearest examples of how unchecked resentment can become lethal. Because violence doesn't always start with fists. Sometimes, it starts with music.
This tragic story is a chilling reminder. Sometimes the deadliest threats come from the people we see every day. If this story kept you on edge, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our weekly true crime videos. Comment below your thoughts on how small conflicts can escalate. We love hearing your perspective. Remember, knowledge can keep you safe and awareness can prevent tragedy. Follow for more true crime.